Festival and his co-direction of Paula Christini's Sensorium X and Opera at the intersection of AI, disability, and interactive design. During the pandemic, he led students in a real-time live cinema production of Maria Irene's Fefu and her friends, created for online audiences in a virtual scenic environment. Scheib is an Obie Award-winning director of World Affairs, a Guggenheim Fellow, Bellona Destroyer of Cities, and directed the West End musical Back Out of Hell, Evening Standard Award Best Musical. So let's welcome Professor Scheib. Yeah, come on. Woo!
There's a joke at MIT that at Massachusetts Institute of Technology, the T is silent. Yeah, that's right. But I'm here all week. Thank you so much for the introduction. Thank you. And thanks for having me. I'm going to talk a little bit about performance today. Basically, performance as it relates to media. Performance itself, of course, also being a kind of media. And so I have this quote that I carry around from Pipilotti Rist. I imagine everyone knows her. If you don't, it'll be a great discovery. She's a video artist, Swiss video artist. She's especially famous for running down a street being filmed smashing the windows out of cars. With a great soundtrack. Check it out. I try to explode the screen. I want to reconquer the space in and around the viewer. And this is something that I try to bring to the theater, actually. But I think it's somehow also applicable to a lot of the bits that we're talking about. So I call this Everything Must Refresh, which, I won't explain. You probably know what it means. And I wanted to just say 3 words, 3 minutes about part of where I end up finding inspiration personally, which is often from history, which is sort of like my vote for a little bit of specialization and an agreement in being broadly generalist. So in 1966, there was a famous show at the Armory called 9 Evenings of Theater and Engineering, where Bell Labs, for completely unknown reasons, managed to fund a project that put together engineers and artists. And one of those projects was called Open Score by Robert Rauschenberg, where they basically put a sensor and an FM transmitter on a pair of tennis rackets, so that each time somebody hit a ball, you would hear this really loud sound, bonk, much like being at Wimbledon today. But it would also turn off one of 48 lights automatically, right? So wireless light control. And here, the controller, a crappy tennis racket, performed at the Armory on a stage that is made to look exactly like a tennis match, performed by 2 visual artists. They hit the ball back and forth, and eventually the lights went completely out, right? Interesting project. And in some ways, I think we kind of end up remaking some of these projects year after year after year after year, which I find both interesting and problematic. This is a project called Variations. There are many different versions of this project, but it began, or actually the 4th of which happened at the Armory show. And this is John Cage working with Nam June Paik, the video artist, and the great choreographer, Merce Cunningham. And I find this particularly interesting because they're doing things like putting sensors on dancers, which is now normal, and putting microphones in in pots with plants in order to sample plant sounds, whatever plant sounds like. And so I find this quite interesting. And so this is also like a bit of an invitation because, you know, there are like a bunch of geniuses in the room and interesting engineers in the room. And I'm about to put together a proposal and a project that I'm hoping to call 19 Nights of Theater and Engineering that I'll produce here at MIT in about 2.5 years. So I'm just getting that project started, and I'm looking for pitches. So if anybody's interested, here's a chance. Anyway, so I'm gonna kind of talk fast about one project because I hope for us to get to questions as quickly as possible. And we're starting a bit late. So Parsifal. Richard Wagner, everybody knows who Richard Wagner is? Maybe, maybe not, which is cool. Composer, working primarily 19th century, end of the 19th century. Richard Wagner did this like bananas thing where he wrote a bunch of operas, pioneered an idea which he refers to as Gesamtkunstwerk. So Gesamtkunstwerk would mean roughly the total work of art, i.e. a work of art in which all other works of art, effectively all other disciplines in the arts are brought to bear on like one cohesive work, right? And that extended to architecture, interestingly. Not only did he write a bunch of operas, but he also established a festival that would only do his works. Imagine that. He built an actual theater to contain this idea in a town which is impossible to get to. And people come from all over the world to see these productions every year. He built it in collaboration with architect Otto Bruchwald, who we don't hear about him much, but very interesting. You see this like shell that goes over the orchestra pit. Very important. You won't see these anywhere else in the world. And yet, Bayreuth everyone is trying to copy their acoustic because the acoustics are unbelievably amazing. His great-great-granddaughter, Katharina Wagner, says the acoustics are great because he built the place with the cheapest wood he could find in the 1890s. I.e., they're still trying to save money. So this orchestra pit, though, has a particular function, which means you can't see the conductor. So you don't see someone waving around, right? You don't even see light getting out. Somehow the light is also kind of trapped in there. And the purpose of it, combined with, you see these columns, a kind of like receding proscenium arch, right? So a frame within a frame within a frame within a frame. It effectively distanced the audience more from the event, but because of the light lock, it actually had this inverse effect of drawing you further in, right? So for Wagner, the point was to create a room that would be dark, which until that point no one did. You didn't turn the lights off in the auditorium. But in Wagner's theater, lights out, dark, dark, dark. It still says in the contract when you work there that you are not allowed to do anything about the auditorium and the light, et cetera, et cetera. It must be dark. So he did it. Cool. By the way, it opened in 1876. Parsifal premiered July 26, 1882, and Parsifal was the first opera that he wrote specifically for this house. I was invited on a question pre-pandemic, hey, do you think that you could incorporate AR or VR in a feature-length opera? And I said, yes, of course, having no real idea how we would pull that off. And the design brief was for an audience of 2,000 people, right? Oh, and there's like all kinds of things that go along with that. So we used a combination of live video feeds and projection mapping, and we actually began with the idea that we would also incorporate a virtual production workflow. That proved completely impossible, but we did manage to build out a system that would control 2,000 AR headsets, sending cues to the audience in real time. A few other things: the light comes out of the water. You know, it's like a big, it's like a big opera. And this is where we started. We began by building a point cloud, basically doing a laser scan in like 2018, or I'm sorry, in 2017. So laser scans at that time were still it was still a little rough, but we went from a point cloud to a millimeter accurate virtual model so that we would be able to effectively put audience members exactly in every seat in a virtual world with the right perspective and the right, et cetera. So if we, and then we had a blank screen. Part of the design brief meant we couldn't use like a full headset, nor could we afford them. Like, can you imagine buying like 2,000 plus an extra 300 in case things break of those like Microsoft headsets? Our initial budget was like, oh yeah, well, we could do it for $10 million. No. So we made a deal with this company called XReal, a Chinese firm that was effectively building these like pretty like lightweight AR glasses. They had a lot of limitations because the little cameras, they are short-sighted, right? They're really beautiful, they do beautiful work and they see really well on a tabletop, the table in front of you, not the table 50 meters from you or 40 meters from you. So we had to do a lot of workarounds to make that function. We built it in, as you can see, we built it in Unity. A hole bigger than the thing the hole is in. There was a concept in the front of the, so then COVID happened and everything paused, right? And we thought the project was dead, and it might have been. But we also came up with this phrase, thanks to photographer Eric Ellenson, a hole bigger than the thing the hole is in. So like with the murder of George Floyd, with the development of COVID, it just kind of seemed like we were all suffering from a wound that might never heal. And that became our motto. As things began to open up again, I was contacted by the festival. They said, yes, it's going to happen, but would you mind making another production first? And so I was asked to create part of Siegfried, which we built as a first-person shooter VR experience as part of an experimental ring, because they couldn't yet put everyone inside the opera house. This was the design. The design looked great to us, but then actually it had to be more spread out because health services got a hold of it, and everyone had to be in separate little tents. There's some nice people. These guys did wear headsets, messing up their hair. Notice that gentleman was not happy, but then he did play and he did love it, I will say. There we go. What we chose was an experience where an audience who was viewing a production of Valkyrie came out of the theater, put the headset on, and the headset brought you back into the theater, back into the auditorium, where a dragon comes through the wall and begins to destroy everything. You pull the sword out of the orchestra pit shell and fight the dragon with Stefan Gould singing the part of Siegfried. The conductor gives you a cue, take it, do it now. And as with most operas, everything has to happen exactly at the right moment. So you couldn't like not win, right? You couldn't like not have those notes from the orchestra. So we basically designed it in such a way that even if you failed to hit the dragon would still basically jump onto your sword. Most people just thought they succeeded, and that was great. But you couldn't actually fail. We were happy to put blood on the hands. We were able to get blood on the hands of the, whatever, the Oculus headset. And there is this sort of sequence where in the opera, Siegfried kills the dragon, gets dragon's blood on his hands, which burns, of course, because dragons have hot blood. He puts his hands in his mouth to cool them. And what we discovered was many of the people performing outdoors, when we got to this part of the opera, they would put their hands in their mouths to give you a sense of like what that audience is like. They know the operas. I didn't really want to show this so much, but please come visit the studio, and I'd be happy to give you a special performance of Siegfried in the headset. So we'll skip over it for now. And then we began modeling the AR, which is complicated at this scale. And I don't have good images of it, because in order to photograph it, you're literally like trying to photograph through a pair of headsets. It doesn't really have a proper recording function. So we have these like, the actual images are either overexposed or underexposed. Still working from drawings a lot of the time, so I would make these sketches and then we would try to like turn them into animations. There's a great scene where a goose is shot with an arrow. Blood splattering into the audience. Everyone loved that. Someone every year, we've done it now 3 years in a row, and this coming year will be the last year. Invariably, someone passes out. And now we have to have a trigger warning. Some photos. Effectively, so as the experience goes, if you look down, there's a floor. The floor is not the same as the theater. Any black space in the auditorium becomes you can make it opaque, right? Because basically, the way in which the light works in the AR experience, you need dark spaces to have like really high quality images. Where there's a lot of light, things become effectively transparent. Right. This was an average technical rehearsal. Headset on, there's like objects flying around. Do folks know the story of Parsifal? I won't go so far into it. Basically, like the world is a mess. No one knows what the problem is. The king, just everything is a disaster. He's been stabbed. He lost the magic spear, but they still have the Grail. Parsifal brings the spear back, heals the wound, and everything is fine, basically. We set it around like a former mine, a sort of lithium-ion mine. We basically just used a big piece of blue crystal to signify cobalt, thinking about how we would tie batteries to electronics, to headsets, to phones. Here's me filming with my phone. Images. There are lots of different kinds of animation. It's a 4-hour-long opera. And so there's roughly 500 cues, 500 scenes, basically, well, which translates to around 300 some scenes. It's all operated with we ended up with a WebSocket sort of system, pretty much the same system that tells you it's time to board your flight, right? So we're pushing signals out to 200 headsets. And scalable, we could do this for 10,000 headsets easily. So it scales up really quite seamlessly. music isn't playing during intermission. This is just underneath it. Ding, ding, ding. And then just a quick comment about a current project called Sensorium X, which is a new opera written by Paola Pristini with a libretto by Brenda Shaughnessy. And this is a collaboration with the NYU Abilities Lab. So here we're really working with folks who have limited or low or no verbal ability. So we developed a kind of platform and a large vocal model in order to develop assistive audio devices for folks who are minimally verbal. So as you know, there's like the Stephen Hawking voice, right? And there are probably like 4 or 5 other, or 6 or 7 other voices. But if you actually got a whole group of people together who are using these devices, they discover very quickly that many of them have the same voice, right? So, and voices being like a really individual thing, like it kind of sucks when you like show up at a party and you have the same voice as someone else, right? So that was like an interesting discovery, and this is a new area for me to work in as a director. And so collaborating with Luc Dubois at NYU, we got 150 or so actors together to work through a 25-minute script of text, sampling voices, and then developing effectively an AI tool that would allow folks to create their own voices. Also so that they could sing like Bjork, scream like Iggy Pop, or whatever. And that has been a really interesting byproduct of that opera. Names. The device itself works a little bit like a theremin. So there's a bunch of depth cameras on a little stand, and they're able to sort of animate that. We could also do it with facial recognition or with eye movement. In addition to it, and look, there's Anna, who was operating a camera in that show, by the way, and a collaborator on the project. We also made use of a kind of like, similar large language model plus stable diffusion plus a few other tools in order to dynamically generate backgrounds based on the actions of the actors. So creating avatars and environments like this fox that was based on the movement of the camera and the movement of the performer, which was quite exciting. In this way, our actor who, in this particular performance, there were 3 different actors who rotated. In this particular performance, an actor who is minimally verbal with autism was able to transform himself into a singing little boy who could dance around and run and fly, which is great. This is a singer, also with cerebral palsy, who stable diffusion is 75% sure is a person. Anyway, these were an interesting process. Again, the design process is still kind of like analog, right? Based on collage, some digital collage, photographic materials. Ding, ding, ding. Again, some like stable diffusion craziness. Cardboard models. I do still use cardboard models to build worlds. This was staged originally in an arena, so a massive space, right? So we had this giant environment to build into. It will be presented next in June as part of a festival at the Royal Opera House in London. And then in 2028, we will do a final version of it for the Los Angeles Paralympics. So we're sort of gearing up for that. Cool. And so I think that's kind of like what I had to show. I'm using more and more AI in developing stuff. I kind of began my career working a lot with cinematic equipment, so working with cameras, especially live cameras, projection mapping of live sequences. Basically trying to draw things which I found to be like quite interesting and engaging in the cinema world into the theater, which, you know, early on I found the theater, I would go to the theater and notice that people were sleeping everywhere. And so in an effort to try to like raise the idea of verisimilitude, you know, so like make it such that you really believe that what's happening is happening, right? Something that's more like performance art or film, to like really convince the world of, really make the world convincing, you know, so reality versus fiction became a really big theme for me. And I used cameras to really like help underscore that. And this was a project here at MIT a few years ago, adapted from a film by Ingmar Bergman called The Silence. This was actually the last show before the COVID shut us down. Yeah. So again, it's a series of holes in a wall with projection on it, and film sets built behind the walls. So it's sort of a partially seen, partially screened situation. That's what I got. Yeah.
We can open up one question and then develop the panel.
Do you have a microphone? You want a microphone?
No, I'll shout.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. I have two questions. One is, earlier yesterday we were asking about the potential of AI to provide singing voices, and you said something about singing in passing during this. Could you describe that a little bit more detail? And then my second question, I'm an Olympian, and I'm connected with the LA 28 effort, and I'm bringing a film of my own to there, and I'm setting up a film festival, and I want to coordinate with you so we are on parallel paths so that we can get it done in an organized fashion. I'll talk with you about that later.
Oh, cool.
But let's do the singing part now. Thank you.
Yeah. So singing. So this part of the goal of this opera, or like, you know, opera. The goal of an opera is to make a great opera, right? But being a big believer in like multi-platform kinds of projects, we also wanted to create a device that would be useful in the world. And access, so accessibility was a major theme of this particular project. And when you start thinking about access, you know, opera is one of those virtuosic kind of, you know, athletic events. Your vocal cords need to be a particular length. You have to have a particular 35 years of training. You have to like, there's a lot that goes into being a great opera singer. And for some folks, you're not going to end up in an opera if you can't hit the notes. And so in this case, we were devising a kind of scheme by which, using AI, using some like new and used technologies, right? So hacking some existing stuff and bringing some new things to play, we were able to make it possible for these two kids to sing. And I mean, there's still a long ways to go in this, but it's advancing rapidly. Yeah. But you know, I don't know if that will make it possible for me to sing. You still have to have a bunch of gear.
Great, thank you for the question. question. Thank you, Jay. So
you have a
question?
yeah,
Go
yeah,
ahead,
yeah.
please.
So in the case of this 4 hours opera
Yeah.
you produce, at the time when the project owner interact with you, what kind of objective he kind of lay out for you in terms of audience experience, and what about the commercial side of things? How successful this kind of project could be?
So, okay, so the opera world primarily, interestingly, is not a commercial world at all, right? It's heavily subsidized by the state, by the city, by the region. Tickets are still really expensive. And in Bayreuth, it's quite difficult to get tickets even, right? So from a commercial standpoint, there's no real, I don't have a sense of the commercial part of it, really. But I do know that there would be, and there could be, a lot of potential commercial applications, for sure. Even just to use it for subtitling, there's tons of commercial application. But in our case, what we ended up with is a system that worked, that did not fail, because like in an opera, particularly in Bayreuth, when the conductor's, at the downbeat of the conductor, everything has to go perfectly. Yeah, for 4 hours. I mean, that was a trick, and required a lot of testing and a lot of all-nighters in the theater testing it. Because every time we wanted to test the entire thing, we had to have 4 hours in the theater, which is impossible. So we would go in after the show the previous night and run it all night long, just to make sure it would work, right? And to work out the kinks. But it was a big international team. I worked primarily with the sort of lead designer that I worked with was Josh Higgison, who's on staff here at MIT with me. We had support from folks at the MIT Nano Immersion Lab. Interestingly, I guess also commercially interesting, like I also had to raise a lot of the money for it. Because like while the Opera House was like, we want you to do this, then they were like, oh, we can't pay for that. And I was like, what do you mean you can't pay for that? You already put the press release out. So, we found some sponsorship. A very important South Korean video game company came up with a lot of the sponsorship. So, yeah. Yeah. And it worked. I mean, it worked. It never failed. One more.
Great, thank you.